Hi, boys and girls. I'm here with our read aloud book. Chapter 10 is one that I'm pretty excited for. Chapter 10 is about someone that Matt has been really suspicious about and been wanting to meet. It's called Great Aunt Dorothy. No one mentioned his attempted breakout next morning. It was as if nothing had happened. Mr. Higgins seemed quite amiable for a change. Mr. and Mrs. Cooper made a little conversation about the weather, and Irene marched in and out, slapping plates of toast and jars of marmalade and honey on the table. Only Sam was different. She refused to look at him, and her face was pale and set. After breakfast, he asked Mr. Higgins if he could use the telephone. Mr. Higgins smiled. "I am so sorry, Matt. The telephone line is down. Did you not hear the storm last night?" Storm? There had been no storm, Matt was sure. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, it kept me awake for at least half an hour. Then, a mobile phone? Surely one of you has one. Alas, there is no signal in these parts of town. Mr. Higgins waved his hand vaguely. So many tall trees. However, Irene has offered to drive into town later and inform the British Telecom. Couldn't I go with her? I could phone from town. Mr. Higgins shook his head. "I'm sorry. You're in our care, and it is best if we speak to this Uncle Dan personally and make sure the arrangements will be suitable as your parents are out of the country." So that was that. He really was a prisoner for as long as Mr. Higgins wanted to hold him. And it was all Sam's fault. She had tricked him into coming here, pretending she could help him. "Can we go out in the garden?" he asked. "Of course," agreed Mr. Higgins, "but first I believe that Samantha's great aunt would like to make your acquaintance. She sent her apologies that she has not welcomed you sooner, but as you may know, she is confined to her room." Matt's heart jumped. Why would she want to see him, and why now? "Go, you're keeping her waiting." Mr. Higgins pushed him towards the staircase. "The last room on the left. She is expecting you." Matt knocked and opened the door. The room was dimly lit, green blinds half drawn at the window. The furniture, a double bed, a writing table, bookshelves, a wardrobe was all placed around the edges of the room, leaving the center clear. There were no chairs. He noticed a sweet smell in the room and took a moment to identify it: chocolate. As his eyes became accustomed to the dimness, he saw something bulky in the corner, motionless. Then the hum of wheels and Great Aunt Dorothy moved forward to greet him. "Matt, how pleasant to meet you at last. Forgive the delay, but as you see, I am not able to come downstairs easily." I'm pleased to meet you too," he said faintly. He tried not to stare at the grotesque figure in the wheelchair. Great Aunt Dorothy was immense. He thought she was probably the fattest person he had ever seen. Her flesh, so much flesh that it overflowed the sides of her chair, was swathed in black, and in spite of the warmth of the day, a fur cape hid her shoulders. Her dark hair was coiled in an elaborate pyramid of curls held by a large tortoiseshell comb. Against the startlingly white flesh of her face, her eyes were sharp and black as basalt. On her lap was a large open box of chocolates. A plump hand hovered over it, chose one, and popped one into the scarlet circle of her mouth. "My weakness," she said. "I cannot resist." He stood before her, awkward and apprehensive, as she ate another 2 chocolates. "I'm sorry there's no chair for you," she said. "As you see, I need the space for my wheelchair." "That's okay," he mumbled. "You may sit on the bed," she said. He stared at the rumpled satin sheets. A heavy, musky scent rose from them. "It's okay. I'm happy to stand." She took another chocolate. "You know," she said when she had sucked it and wiped her lips, "Samantha is such an excitable young girl. I dote on her, but she is a worry to all of us. So much imagination, so much silliness. At this very moment, she is punishing us. And you know why?" No, I don't." She leaned forward, brandishing the chocolate box at him. "Because her devoted mother and father have removed her from that boarding school, because they have missed her and want to spend time with her. And because of that, she has disowned them. Disowned them! And I, too. I who held her in my arms when she was no more than a week old." She shook her head sadly. "There is no gratitude in that young lady." Matt hunted for something to say. I think she's just a little mixed up at the moment. I'm sure she loves you, really." He watched her select another chocolate. He understood now why Sam had said that no one could imagine her as part of an English family. Everything about her was so un-English, even more so than Mr. Higgins. "Sam says you lived in South America?" I was born there. My father was the youngest son of Samantha's great-grandfather. He was a missionary in the Brazilian forests. When he died, I moved in with my mother to Rio de Janeiro and met my son Roberto, but every year I came to England to see my beloved relatives. Not for the past 3 years. My health has been too poor. Too many chocolates, perhaps. She took another. Then, when my darling Edward, Samantha's father, arrived in Rio, I decided there was nothing to keep me there any longer. Roberto had gone, poof, and so at Edward's invitation, I came here. It all sounded quite plausible. Great Aunt Dorothy sighed sadly. We worry for Samantha. I, her loving parents, and even Mr. Higgins. We worry that she will do something silly, harm herself, perhaps something even worse. Matt shook his head violently. No, I'm sure she won't. The great aunt sighed again. I hope you are right, but will you help us, yes? Help us to keep her from harm? She waited. He nodded, speechless. And you will let us know if she tries to spread nasty stories about us? Silly stories, spiteful stories. Her plump fingers jabbed at another chocolate. He nodded again. Very good, she said, and waved the almost empty box below his nose. You will have one, yes? So what do you think of Great Aunt Dorothy? Asked Sam. She was hovering at the foot of the stairs waiting. Matt glanced around quickly. He couldn't see anyone, but he had the feeling that they were being watched. She was telling me about her life in South America, he said. I thought she was nice. What? Nice, he repeated loudly. We got on quite well. She thinks a lot of you, worries about you. Sam looked at him as if he was mad. Come on, he said. Let's go for a walk. She shook her head. No thanks. Oh, come on, he coaxed. I'm sorry I got angry with you. In the end, she agreed, and they set off under the watchful gaze of Mr. Higgins. Once they were out of earshot, Matt spoke. Actually, I thought she was really creepy. She wanted me to keep an eye on you, seemed to think you might harm yourself. Huh. Look, I'm sorry about last night, he said, but I had to stop you. I had to convince Mr. Higgins that I didn't believe anything that you might have told me. She sniffed. Well, you shouldn't have been that hard. You don't believe me, do you? No, I don't. I think there's something funny going on here, but I can't believe those aren't your real parents. I thought you were my friend. How can I be your friend? We've only known each other a couple of days, and quite honestly, I think you're a real pain. And I don't like the way you tricked me into coming here, telling me that you'd help me. I didn't trick you, and I was going to help you. I've got the money in my room upstairs. I just thought you might be able to help me first. Anyway, she said sulkily, what's the hurry to get away? It's not as if you got anywhere else to go. Maybe not, but I certainly don't want to stay here. I want to get on with my own life. Go on then, see if I care. If you hadn't opened your big mouth last night. I didn't, Let's not argue, he snapped. Look, I'm sorry, but I have to go. Or try to go at least. In a place this size, there must be some sort of escape. He stuck his hands in his pockets, and with an assumed nonchalance he began to stroll across the lawns, stopping occasionally to peer at the sky or to pull or smell a flower. Once past the first shrubbery, however, he began to run. Sam's footsteps pounded behind him, and he cursed, but the boundary wall lay ahead. What he needed was a medium-sized tree to climb, and he would be up there on top. Never mind the long drop on the other side. He'd worry about that later. When he reached the wall, he was breathless, but he had no intention of resting. With Sam trailing after him, he followed the course of the wall around the garden. He had traveled some 300 or 400 meters inside the wall before he first felt the first twinge of anxiety. Trees were there in plenty, but none nearer than 10 meters to the wall. Only a few sawn stumps remained of those that had been closer, and he could only assume that they had been deliberately cut down to prevent any possibility of escape by such a method. Stubbornly, he continued, but each step only confirmed his suspicions. Finally, sick at heart, he realized they had come full circle and were back at the high wooden gates. I could have told you you couldn't get out, said Sam smugly. He glared at her. Really, she was the most infuriating girl he had ever met. If you knew, why didn't you just say something? Her sharp chin jutted. Why should I? Half the time you don't believe what I say, and the rest of the time you shout at me. No, I don't. It's impossible to talk to you. This isn't a game, you know. He stomped over to the gates, picked up a handful of gravel, and threw it in a gesture of useless fury at the sullen iron-bound wood. He flung himself on the grass and tried to think. There was no way out except through the gates or over the wall. The wall was finished in smooth gray cement, not a finger or toe hole in sight. Barbed wire and jagged chunks of glass were embedded in the top. But the gates, although tall and built of smooth, solid vertical planks, could easily be scaled with a ladder, and he knew just where to get one. If someone could keep the others busy, he could sneak into the basement, steal the ladder, and hide it somewhere on the grounds until after dark. there was someone. There was Sam. That is the end of chapter 10. I'd like you to make a prediction. What do you think Matt is going to do? What do you think his plan is going to be to escape? I'd love to hear your thoughts.